All right, welcome CvCISO Podcast listeners. This is episode 20 of the CvCISO Podcast, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. It's already been 20 episodes. But
that is
anyway,
crazy.
Yeah, and that was Meg's voice. Meg
and
is
we're
my
still on
co-host.
the air. They haven't kicked us out.
And that's Jordon's. Dude, we could do some serious crazy stuff on podcasts without getting kicked out.
For real? Like anything?
For real, man. If you look at some of the podcasts, do you listen to podcasts much? Maybe.
Sure, yeah.
I used to, when I commuted, I would commute an hour one way to work. And I did that for years. And I would listen to podcasts all the time. But now not so much.
Did you have a favorite?
I wasn't in security at that time, so I was kind of all over the place. I did a lot of my news from podcasts or political.
You said news.
Yeah.
News? Okay, good.
Yep. Or political stuff. Christian
We should talk.
thing.
You want to talk politics in today's podcast?
Oh, gosh. No.
Yes, let's do it.
That would be so much fun. Actually, I'm starting another podcast. This one's like just a personal podcast. And it's personal because, there's just stuff you have to get off your chest.
Yeah.
And, which I think is good because some people really like the genuine, authentic
Conversation.
discussion. Yeah. Yeah. And this podcast, you want to know the name of it?
Mm-hmm.
All right. The name of it is going to be InfoSec to Insanity.
InfoSec to Insanity.
InfoSec to Insanity. If you shortened it up, it'd be I to I, but, don't take it too far down that path.
I don't think we see eye to eye on that.
Oh, it's painful. So I thought we were closer than this.
That was an Evan joke all the way. And notice he didn't know how to respond to it.
Oh, I was trying to think of an appropriate way to respond. That's the problem. We were talking before we started the podcast about stuff that goes on in your brain. I had some things to come back with, but it would have been inappropriate.
Which usually doesn't stop you, but...
Yeah, I was going to say,
right?
you care about that.
I know. You're so true. You guys know me. But that'll be the cool thing about the InfoSec to Insanity is there won't be any stopping. It'll be open, honest, just conversation. You know what I mean? And I'll have a guest on every week, and we're just gonna get down to the nitty gritty. You guys will be guests eventually. At least you'll be invited. You may not agree after you hear what happens there. You might be, this isn't good for my career. I don't think I'm going to visit Evan on his podcast, but I will listen to it because it's entertaining.
Is that something that concerns anyone? Like, that's maybe the worst thing that prevents people from being 100% authentic is this concern that they actually will get canceled. Like everything that they've worked for, people will just, they'll lose clients, they'll lose friends, family. Like, that's probably the worst thing. Does that ever concern you?
Yeah,
absolutely.
No, for sure it does, man. And I think, and that's part of the reason for doing the podcast is one, I don't know for you guys, but it just feels good to be me, to not try to be somebody that I'm not, to not try to play the game, to just say what I feel. I think it's good for your mental health. But then you also realize, like, how many other people must, kind of feel that way? Like, they can't say what they really mean. They can't say what they really want to say. They might be afraid that they're going to offend somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I battle that all the time.
And that's why I think that's another part of the podcast. Is just, hopefully it inspires other people to just say what you want to say.
It's a
okay
catch-22 because I think everyone believes that they should be able to say what they want to say, that people should accept them for who they are. But yet, to do that, then you have to do that to others. Like you have to accept even the worst things that someone is saying that you completely disagree with. Like, you have to let them be them if you want to be you.
Right.
You can't let them be them, then still want to be accepted as who they are.
We justify shutting people up under the premise of hate speech. Like there's some possible way that you're going to be able to eradicate hate from people's speech. And
Right.
who's the arbiter of what's hate speech? If I say something you disagree with, that may not be hate speech. I mean, there's hate speech and there's speech that you hate. But either way, people are people. They have thoughts. They have, feelings. You need to speak. So it's trying to get those things out and not purposely trying to offend people or purposely trying to disrespect people.
Right.
Because you also have to put all, we talk about in information security and as a vCISO, how important it is to put things into context. The worst decisions you make with information security in making program decisions are ones that are out of context. The same thing is true with what people say, right? If I use swear words in context, they shouldn't be offensive, depending on, the context. Like if I say, and I'm just going to swear, so, whatever. I say, fuck yeah, that shouldn't be offensive to anybody. But if I say fuck you, that might be offensive. So the word itself, I think, and I think that's kind of the point, because we can take anything out of context. I mean, and be offended by it. Anything. So you
But
can choose what you could be offended by.
sometimes you are on the receiving end of something being out of context. And then I think it's okay to have boundaries and establish them.
But you get to choose what you take, like, when we're talking about the circles,
Yeah.
99.9% of the world isn't in any one of my circles. So if they hate me, if they are offended by me, fine. It doesn't change me being who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if my wife is offended by what I said, or my wife is mad, that matters. She's in the second circle. So that's a really, really bad thing.
Yeah.
But I think hopefully people will learn, we'll talk mostly about information security in that podcast, but also a lot of parallels between information security and life. Because I don't think you can separate information security from life.
Right.
If you think you can, well then get rid of every bit of information you've got. Get rid of all your phones, all your electronics. Bury yourself somewhere, because I mean you're all affected by it.
Yeah. When are you starting it, Evan?
19th of September is the first episode. We'll do them live. We'll live stream them every Thursday at 9 o'clock Central. Thursday nights, and record them, make a podcast. No, that was one of the problems, because originally the security shit show, I started that because I wanted a place to do this. I wanted a place to it's so good for your mental health when you can just get out what's in here.
Yeah.
And it helps believe it or not, it helps when you're challenged, because it validates, right? Sometimes there are things that go on in your brain that you're just not sure if it's sane or not, especially when you see, when I'm thinking something and I look around the world, like information security, right? So many things that I see happen in information security are insane. Why would you do it that way? It doesn't make any sense at all. Logically, none. And so you do that enough, and then you start wondering yourself, am I crazy? Why aren't people doing this obvious thing? And so, podcasts like this, that's what the shit show was originally meant to be, when I had co-host with Ryan Cloutier and Chris Robert. It was awesome. I loved it, But as you went along the way, you have 3 separate personalities and 3 different motives that started to emerge. One, Chris Robert, super well known, very interested in how many listeners we had. Wanted to grow the podcast. When I started the podcast, I don't care if there's any listeners. This is all about just getting things out. For me, it was a mental health thing. And then Ryan, I think, was kind of in the middle. But anyway, long story. The co-host thing, I don't think works if you're going to do a truly authentic, personal
Organic.
kind of
Sure.
podcast. Yeah.
Yep.
I like it.
But I'll have guests every week. Except for
Otherwise,
once.
that would be a little weird if you got
Yeah,
on
that
there and started talking to yourself.
Well, you could be your own guest. Just interview yourself.
Well, you could do like the radio show kind of thing, where you're just talking about certain events and then giving your take on that. You could do that too,
Yeah, I see that.
We'll see. And I think some of the, I'll have to send a waiver to guests ahead of time just to make sure that I'm respecting, like, what things are off limits for me to talk about.
Yeah.
And what kind of visual cue should we use for you to tell me that don't go any further with it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to talk about because I want to talk about everything. You know what I mean? I think that's one of the things that people like about me, and it's also one of the things people hate about me, is the real deal. I mean, there's no bullshit here, but some people, they work in places where you get fired for being authentic.
Right.
So anyway, that brings us to our topic. Sorry, this is ADHD.
That's why people tune in. That's why people tune in, because they want a variety of topics. This is a buffet of ideas.
Thoughts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is what ADHD does to you, my friend.
So I hope people came hungry, because we've got a lot on the buffet line.
I was wondering how you were going to finish that, because we got a lot of food to put on your plate.
Mental food.
And, yeah.
Food for thought.
It's raw food, so it's probably going to make you sick. Yeah, raw, uncut food that's been sitting out for a few days. Whatever. No. It'll make you.
This is where I don't know if I should be like, okay, guys, let's get going, or if I should allow the insanity to continue.
Well, since it's almost time to wrap up the podcast, maybe you should reel it in.
We should have a button too. A button you can push that's like off topic.
I want the
I don't have that on this. Excuse me, I just coughed. So here's the topic. So for anybody who wants to know, just fast forward to 13:17 on the podcast if you want to avoid all the crap that you just heard.
So I
wanted to talk on this podcast because we run into this often, and as a CvCISO, you're probably run into it too. I want to talk about events, incidents, and breaches. When I brought this topic up before, everybody's got an opinion, right? On what do these three things mean? How do they impact me as a CvCISO? How do they impact my customer? And every time I bring this up, it's a debate. And as a practitioner, as the CvCISO, the important thing is to get past the debate and get to an agreement with your customer on what these three things mean. Document the definition so that you're working on the same language, right? So event. What's you guys? I'd love to hear your take on what's the difference between an event, an incident, and a breach. And don't worry about the legal crap and don't overcomplicate it.
For me, I think events is like on your logs getting a critical, but then you look into the critical and it really is nothing. So some of the noise that's out there.
Yeah,
okay.
So anything that happened.
Okay.
Is an event.
I like those. In my traditional, I say traditional, just my own brain tradition. I mean, this is what I've always viewed it as. An event is just something happened. Could be good, could be bad, could be whatever. Now, to what you said, Meg, and again, when I'm saying this is what I've used as a definition, I'm not saying that what you're using is incorrect at all.
Okay.
I'm just showing the difference between what I'm thinking and what you're thinking, and where we need to come to an agreement if we were working together on something. So what you described would be false positive. Because if it's got something critical associated with it, in my mind, I think that that's an incident. Because the difference between event and an event is just things that happen. An incident is something that could have an adverse consequence associated with it. Something bad could be related to it.
It's like an event that's been categorized. Does it have to be bad to be an incident, or?
Yeah, for me it does, because those are the ones I'm usually concerned about. But again, Meg, you could totally go to your customer and with that same definition that you use.
Right.
And the important part in communication is that they're on the same page with you.
Yeah.
And I think
and I wouldn't see if there was a critical line item. If it were a positive critical, to me, I would see that as an incident. It's where if it was,
right.
Well, when I was looking at logs in my previous job, the number of criticals that were nothing far surpassed the number of criticals that actually were something.
Yeah. It's interesting. So back in the day, you ever worked with intrusion detection systems?
I have not.
IDS?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Excuse me, I'm coughing a bit. So back in the day, intrusion detection systems, today there's a lot more sophistication to them, but the basics are still the basics, right? So an intrusion detection system sits on a network and it's essentially ingesting all the traffic that it sees. Now, where you place it, how you place it, whatever, is going to determine what traffic it sees. And what it's looking for, an indicator of something bad, right? Events. It's looking through all the events that are happening on the network. And then based on how it's configured, it'll alert you to, good, bad, whatever. So events are everything that's happening. Incident, unconfirmed at this point, right? It's an incident, meaning based on how the IDS was set up, whether it was signature-based or anomaly-based or whatever, something triggered based on the way it was configured and presented me with an alert. So that would be an incident pending an investigation. And then you would do root cause analysis on every one of those events or,
right.
Unconfirmed incidents, we'll call it, or whatever. And then if you did a good job, you'd find the root cause, and then you'd either confirm that this is actually an incident, like something bad has happened, or there's an indicator something bad has happened, or the false positive.
Right.
This is actually legit traffic, and it just triggered. We would call that whole process tuning. That's tuning an intrusion detection system.
Good.
I really enjoyed that kind of work because people automate too much of it today, because you miss out on the really big benefit of learning everything that's going on your network.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
The best thing the number one advice I give anybody on information security is situational awareness. Understanding what your environment is, what's going on around you. And man, intrusion detection systems going through all the monotonous tuning, super, super beneficial. Made me a much better security person, I think, today.
But you would only really look at the things that were flagged as potential incidents, right? I mean, you're not like, so you'd have some sort of automation. The IDS would be telling but you're saying once the IDS is giving you this list of all these potential incidents, you would encourage people to not automate that next part, to actually have someone looking through all of that.
Yeah. So the way intrusion detection systems work, the ones that are least likely to have false positives are signatures. So signature based. So typically when we would put an intrusion detection system, we would only activate signature. Yeah. Signatures, because those are very rarely false positive, because it's actual we've seen this same traffic pattern before. It matches, it's always been kind of a
It's
thing.
the fingerprint, yeah.
And then you would analyze, all the rest of the traffic and you tune it. You'd always, whenever we put these things in, we'd always tune it. I call it tuning it loose, meaning it's going to give us a boatload of false positives. Like it's going to alert everything. And then, yeah, it's going to be noisy. And you just, it would take 6 to 9 months at least to tune an intrusion detection system to be actually functional.
Evan,
but along that process, you learn so much.
is an example of signature. So the false positives that I saw all the time, I worked for a Christian organization. We had a lot of pastors that traveled. And so when they took their laptops and they went from the location that they live in, say it was Minnesota, and then they traveled to North Carolina, and all of a sudden they're using their computer and maybe they didn't shut it down and opened it up in a different location, then we'd get a critical alert saying, hey, this computer's being used over here in North Carolina and it really should be in Minnesota. Is that an example of a signature or no?
Yes. So that was probably tagging on geolocation, so source
Okay.
IP address. And yes, that would probably have been a signature trip. We call it trip, like, when you trip an alert.
Yeah.
Because you could set thresholds to, like, other types of things you can, anomaly based, which is typically, something just unusual on the network. So in order for anomaly based to work, you have a baseline of what normal looks like. And then something outside of the normal would trigger an alert. That's an anomaly. It's something that's different than what we normally see. And you set, baselines, clipping levels. Sometimes we would call it a clipping level. So like if it exceeds a clipping level, that's something bad. Those are the two most common methods. Now there's a whole bunch of, sophisticated AI crap that people are doing, but just those two basics, you could always find. I mean, we secured a lot of really good networks that way.
Yeah.
So as you're tuning it loose, there's a song about that, right? Tune it loose.
Probably something from the 70s or something.
But when you're doing that, you're looking at, I mean, how many incidents would you, like, as you're going through that 6-9 month process of getting it tuned, at the beginning, how many incidents are you actually going through in a day?
So everything that went across, we would and again, this is what we use, or what I've traditionally used as definitions, because I want to be very respectful for other people who have different definitions. And it's okay if you and I are not working together on something, it's okay to have different definitions. It's when we come together that we have to have agreement on what our definitions are going to be. So everything that went across the wire, we would classify as just events. Just things that are happening all the time. Some are good, some are bad, some we don't know, some we don't care. And then triggers, when we got alerted to something, we would call that an unconfirmed incident. So it's something that looks interesting enough for us to take a look at. We wouldn't call it an incident yet. An incident would be when we conducted the root cause analysis and found out that this is actually bad stuff, the bad event that could cause us harm. And then that's an incident.
So how many would you investigate in a given day at the beginning of the tuning process?
Depends on how many. Depends on where it was set. So, usually you'd have sensors. So you'd have sensors and a collection point typically. And depending on where the sensor was, and depending on, there's a lot of dependencies to determine how much at the beginning. But we would usually collect them, a whole bunch of them, and then create our own scripts to weed out the things that we just know, intrinsically that weren't part of signatures and things. And then, it was a long time process, because another thing, if you saw the amount of time, man, there were times when, like at US Bank, when we when I put in their intrusion detection system, it was full time for a while. We had 2 or 3 full-time staff members that were just dedicated to tuning the intrusion detection systems. But you had no alternative because otherwise they're just pieces of junk that don't do anything, And
I mean, one of the reasons I ask is because, I've never sat in that position, like where I'm tuning an IDS it just makes, in my head, I'm thinking probably at the beginning, there's tons of things that people are investigating. And I'm right away, I think, well, how quickly are you backlogged then? So now you're investigating something from like a week ago, or is it not that much that it's,
Well, a lot of times it's repeat events. So you'll have, because it'll keep triggering because it's tuned this way. So this source IP to this destination IP, these ports, this data, whatever is set up to trigger. It's normally not just one packet, that causes that. It'll be a whole bunch of packets that, keep triggering potentially. And so as you're reviewing, doing the root cause analysis, like, okay, this, okay, it's a false positive. Then you can go back and not have to investigate the other 10,000 alerts that are related to that same thing. So whenever, you would bulk them up. So you would, put all your alerts in groups so that when you do your root cause analysis on a single, event or packet, you could see all the rest of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What are some examples of IDS tools?
The open source one, one that's been around for a long time that I always loved is Snort. Snort, S-N-O-R-T. Yeah. Yeah, you can set up your own lab. So if you do like Wireshark, throw Wireshark on your system, and Wireshark is essentially doing the same thing that an intrusion detection system is doing in terms of taking all of everything that you see in Wireshark, we would call those events. Things are happening. The difference is that you put rules around what Wireshark is seeing to trigger, something bad. Potentially. Yeah, there's open source tools that you can use.
Stateful packet inspection?
It depends.
I was trying to throw some CvCISO, assessment.
Some CISSP stuff at me.
Yeah. And this is people can pass the exams.
Now, the cool thing about the IDS is when you do it right, when you train it correctly, it becomes an invaluable piece of equipment on your network. If you don't, you end up tuning out legitimate traffic, or you end up tuning out legitimate attack traffic, right? Because once you've tuned it, it's not going to alert you to that again. So if you did a crappy job of root cause analysis, you might have just tuned out legitimate attack traffic.
Yeah.
And you're never going to know about it again.
Yeah.
So it's you got to be really careful. But so events have always been that to me traditionally. Incidents have been an event with a potential adverse consequence associated with it. Like something bad could happen. The degree of badness, that's why we classify incidents. So based on specific criteria that you decide, right? So I've always classified incidents as high, medium, low. Because I like to keep it simple, which would then dictate the actions we're going to take.
Right.
A breach and this is where I don't get in trouble, but I disagree with most of the legal community all the time because they'll argue all the time that this isn't a breach or this isn't, they're clueless, I think, and they're not together on what it is. So breach to me is, think of like a fortress, right? Somebody got in your fortress. They breached your defenses. That is a breach.
Yeah.
Whereas they'll say, well, they didn't take data, so it's not a breach. Well, that's called a data breach. That's a little bit different. But a breach is just you got past defenses.
So like as soon as someone gets phished and someone logs into their account, that's a breach. They haven't done anything yet, but they typed in the password, they're in.
Like a breach. And then if they've gone on to access based on our definition of whatever we've defined, they've gone on to access non-public data. That's a data breach.
Makes sense.
They've accessed a database that they weren't supposed to access. That's a database breach, which might also be a data breach, but it's also a breach. And it's also an incident, and it's also an event. You know what I mean? So it's like event leads to incident, which leads to potentially a data breach, or a breach, which potentially leads to a data breach, which potentially leads to a database breach. You know what I mean? It just continues to change that way.
Yeah.
So you think legal teams kind of fight against that basically because they're kind of trying to put it in a place where they don't have to report the breach. They say, "Oh, no data was, so now you don't have to report this," kind of a thing.
Yeah, maybe. I think a lot of it is, and I know it's going to sound mean, but I think a lot of it actually is just ignorance. There's such a negative connotation associated with the word breach that we don't want to call anything a breach.
All right.
It's not a breach. Well, did they get past the defenses? Yeah. Then it kind of seems like a breach to me.
Yeah.
I mean, Google the word breach. I'm just going to go with what Google says. I'm not an English major or nothing, but again, depending on who you're working with, I think these are good discussions to have in advance of an incident, a breach, or, the sooner the later, so that everybody's on the same page. So if my definition of a breach is when you get past a line of defenses, and there might be 20 lines of defenses. You got past one, you breached that line. You got past another, you breached that one. And so that would be my preferred definition. But let's say that, legal counsel or the executives say, no, a breach is only if there's concrete evidence that data, personally identifiable information, has been exfiltrated.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
in
then
the world,
what should I call these other things that I call breach? Should I come up with other words for those then or something?
yeah.
Prevents.
In the world of education, we used to call it calibrating, because if you have students that are trying to get an A on a test or an A in the class, and they've got me as a teacher versus another teacher at the same grade level, you got to make sure that your expectations are calibrated, because we want the A to mean the same thing, whether they're in my class, a different teacher's class, whatever the class. So calibrating your expectations.
And so when you're documenting these with each client, you're going to just make sure you have the same calibrated understanding of all this stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. I love it. That's a great word. It's a great word, Meg. I'm going to start using that, honestly. Calibrating our language, our approach.
Yep.
And then as a vCISO, if let's say you've got 10, 20 vCISO clients, make sure that this is in your notes.
Yeah.
Right? Because like the way I've always done it is if say I've got 10 clients I'm working with right now, and we're all using the same language, right? The one that I've always used, right? So they took my advice, my consultation. Yeah, let's go with that definition. Then that wouldn't get documented in my files, my client files. It would only be the deviation, right? So like customer X is like hell-bent on this is what an event is. This is what an incident is. And it's not what I'm just used to. I would document just those anomalies, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's on your notes. But then you'll also, those definitions will probably live in their policies and stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Policies, your incident response plan. Yeah. Other places for sure.
Yep.
And I think that's the key, because far too often I see information security people waste hours and hours and hours arguing on, no, this is an event. Well, this is an event. Whatever. It's a waste of time. What's important is whoever you're serving, that you have the right definition. Now, if I'm working with another security person on incidents or on incident response team, and we have different definitions. Well, then one of us is going to have to swallow our pride a little bit and use a different,
Yeah.
a different definition of something.
Yeah. That's the
But
calibration piece.
Yeah, it's so counterproductive to see people argue about stupid shit because you're not going to get anything done,
Right.
I feel like our entire world needs to be calibrated. We have
Oh,
different
boy.
definitions
That's
for
the
everything.
truth.
I agree with you on that. And it should be calibrated according to my baseline. Thank you.
Yeah. What
So
was
what's
the
what the
name of your podcast? Evan's World.
that should be topic 1. All the definitions that are wrong in this world.
And then nobody will listen ever again.
That's okay. I still get that mental health thing I was looking for.
So what is the definition of a compromise? Is that the same as a breach?
I think you have to compromise has to be, basically, because it has to, I think, in my opinion, compromise has to be applied to of what? Data compromise, boundary compromise, network compromise, endpoint compromise. I mean, there's so many things to compromise. I think it's unauthorized access to something would be, compromise in my book. How about you?
I'm thinking, like, when I hear the word, now this isn't coming from any Google definition or anything, but when I hear the word compromise, and if I'm comparing it to the word breach sounds more matter of fact, like they got past the walls. Compromise is almost like when you think of like a spy or something, like where, like, it's almost like you're not so sure, like something could have happened. Now, I don't know that this actually applies to InfoSec or anything, but like, that's when I think of compromise. It's like, is this person compromised? Have they been reached? Have they been influenced in some way that now the data is tainted?
Yeah.
Where you don't actually know, you just think it's compromised. That means we can't necessarily trust it now,
I'd see that as an incident, just because compromise is really that if you've compromised something, that means that what you expected it to be, it's different. And it could be positive or negative. So maybe that means.
Well, I think an incident, when I've always thought of the chain, there's an event, there's something that I've become aware of. Isn't an incident. Okay, it is an incident or not. If it's not, then I don't care. Or maybe I do care just because I'm interested, but I probably don't care. But if it is an incident, meaning this is an event that could have a potential negative consequence associated with it, then I go through classifying the incident, right? Like, what kind of incident is this? Is it just somebody got phished, but nobody actually used those credentials? Because then that wouldn't be necessarily their credentials were compromised.
Right.
But there wasn't really a breach because nobody actually used those compromised credentials to get access to something. So I think an incident can be a compromise, can be a breach, can be, I've always seen compromise as being something that is no longer as it was intended.
Yep.
Right. And I think too, like, you made me think about it, like the way you were saying it, like when you know that the passwords are out there. So it's not a breach, like your account is compromised because the passwords are public. No, we don't know if anyone accessed your account, or potentially no one did breach your account, but your account is compromised because someone could have.
Yeah. And something somewhere led to the data breach of your account being compromised in that situation, right? Because there's no way the attacker would have that data had there not been a breach somewhere. And it just led to my account being, compromised. Yeah. Yeah. It's always an interesting discussion now. And I like having these types of discussions because I think a lot of times in your normal day-to-day life, when things are just all seem like they're events, right? There's not anything bad happening right now that you don't think of these things. And then when an incident happens, or whatever you want to call it, then it's like, oh shit. And what do we call this? Because then you start having, and it becomes very chaotic in an incident response when there's communication breakdowns, consistent, constant communication breakdowns. When I'm referring to something and you're receiving something different, so you're going about, because one thing in incident response that's really important is precision, a level of precision, clarity in what to do about it, So that's why it's really important to ask these things out. I wouldn't use this as an opportunity to posture with others or with your clients. This is, consistently reassure them that their definition might be different and their definition is not wrong.
Right.
You know what I mean? I just have my definition because this is where it came from. That's why I kind of gave the background. But if like Meg, you were my client and you're like, no, this is how I view an incident. Well, then my job is to serve you. And if I get an opportunity, if I'm so set on my definition being correct, just because, the other 10 clients are this way, then I'll use this opportunity to coach you, maybe along the way to get in line maybe with the others. But it doesn't do anybody any good to come across like, oh, Meg, that's a stupid answer. What are you, crazy?
Yeah, because if you keep doing the coaching, then eventually they get like, dude, didn't I tell you this is what I think? Why do you keep trying to go back to this direction?
I'm reading a book called Conversational Intelligence, and I'm not done with it yet, but I'm sure it'll be a topic on this podcast. When I'm done, I'll bring some nuggets here. But one thing that relates to what we're saying is just the understanding that, like, in a conversation, there are so many different places to get misunderstood. There's what the person is saying, so the words they're using, what they mean by what they say. Then there's a person who's hearing what they're saying and trying to understand what they mean by what they're saying. And all those things can be vastly different,
Right.
And there are a lot of places for misunderstanding, which is why the main point, the golden nugget from what you're saying is at least agree on the definition. At least now you know what the words mean.
I find working remotely that's been one of the biggest challenges for me because I'm a very direct communicator. I don't like a lot of fluff. I mean, sometimes an email needs to be a little bit longer because you need detail, but just in terms of, coupon code done, I can come across as very abrupt, where that's not how I'm feeling. I feel like I'm upset about something or frustrated, but it's just direct communication. And that's that whole written language and the probability of misunderstandings through the written word.
Mm-hmm.
I think it can happen more than face to face.
Yeah, I always like the written word because I live in this. Right? This is not back when I was doing constant CvCISO work. Like, I live in this. I do this every day.
Yeah.
I take a lot of this stuff for granted, and others don't. Right? They don't live in this every day. The CEO doesn't live in this every day. The CIO doesn't live in this every day. Nobody probably at the organization that I'm working lives this every day. And so they forget things, right? We agreed that this was the definition. So that's why, documentation has saved my ass so many times because we can go back to it. Oh yeah, that's right. Okay. I remember now. And I think it's also important that if your customer or client or whoever you're working with has a different definition than you do, you still need to state what your traditional definition is or was. And the reason why that's important is, if you're going to consult, something bad happens or whatever, but you never want them to come back and say, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me everybody else uses this definition? And so giving them the opportunity that this is the definition I've always used. This is the definition used by the other 10 clients, maybe, or whatever. But I respect this is your organization. We're going to go with the definition that you have. Because if you don't tell them,
Right.
then they'll come back and like, why didn't you say anything? And I hate that.
Yeah, and that's your opportunity to kind of up with them and say, we still agree that this is the definition, right? You're just kind of solidifying, okay, this is what everyone else is doing, but we agree this is how we're defining it here.
Yeah. That proper definition stuff, again, it seems some sort of superficial, like it doesn't really matter, but there are, especially at a critical moment, typically there are times when people are using those definitions literally and making decisions on those definitions literally. And if they've got a different definition than what you got, you're not on the same page. That's a bad place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, all right. So again, definitions of event, incident, and we agree. And then we also, you brought up a good one too, Jordan, compromise, be open to, other words that your client might have or whoever you're working with. Like, what about this word? How should we define this word?
Yeah.
So being open to, that's a good word, man. We should define that one too.
I would imagine when you're developing the incident response plan, this can be pretty labor intensive because you really got to think of all the different scenarios, and Lord have mercy. I would think that'd be difficult.
Well, it's just like anything, if you're going to do it right, it takes work,
Yeah.
And so incident response is typically define the process, just every event or incident is going to go through this process, right? So, it's like taking a big funnel. And then when you get to the classification or the actual investigation of the incident, then you'll have a playbook, which is typically, and the playbooks are all the different scenarios. So,
Okay.
you don't have to change the whole incident response plan because that pipeline is still, going to work, but we've tacked on, if it's a phishing attack, here's the playbook. If it's a firewall compromise, here's the playbook. If it's a web application compromise, here's the playbook. If it's a ransomware, here's the playbook. You know what I mean? So you just end up changing the playbook.
Sweet.
And you're going to get it wrong the first time. And everybody does, right? Who would expect anybody to be an incident response expert in their first incident?
Right.
That's kind of it just makes me think of with the class, maybe integrating some playbook exercises as it relates to the topic at hand.
It actually might be fun too.
Mm-hmm.
It might be fun to do a series with us of building, a part of the security program, like building an incident response plan and then doing some scenario exercises together. That might be fun.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
Maybe bring on people from the community for each phase that we go in and have them participate. That could be cool.
That could be cool. All right. So let me ask you guys this, and it's not, don't judge at all. Have you been in information security incidents before? Either at home personally, on the sidelines, or, deeply involved in an incident?
Yes.
I've had credentials taken from me personally. And then there were a couple of occasions with the logs that I was talking about where it actually went from an event to an incident.
Okay.
But I didn't handle the incident. My job was just to report to my boss.
Okay, so handoff.
Yep.
Yeah, one of the more common things, that we see as an MSP would be like a help desk ticket that comes in, or we monitor for it now as well. But like I alluded to earlier, is a login, a login that came in for like Office 365 from a different location, and it gets flagged. And then, we just had one just the other day. And so we had to reach out. Turns out it was a false positive because the person, they logged in from Germany, but it was using Starlink, and it's because they're on a cruise in Greece, So like, right away, like comes, oh man, I log in from Germany. And but then you unwrap the thread and you realize, oh, they were just doing work from their cruise.
Right.
Yeah. Those false positives can give your customers so much confidence, because as you investigated, you found, oh, it was this. They feel like there's actually somebody watching the front door for me. You know what I mean? There's somebody who's paying attention to stuff, so I can go focus. It just builds so much trust when you do those investigations and you come out to be, false positive. But
I can share a story personally if it's an embarrassing one. I don't want to share it, so we can move on to. You can wrap this up if you want, but
you sort of brought it up. I mean, hey, I don't.
Are you kidding me?
Let me tell you something like really embarrassing about myself, but I don't want you to know about it. Shit, maybe I should have kept my mouth shut to begin with.
This story, if this story is the story that you would use to let people know that anyone can fall for this crap. Yep. Anyone can fall for it. No one is better than anyone else. You can get tricked. And this wasn't all that long ago, so I should be a mature information security professional at this point and spot these things like nothing. But it was my first time using Facebook Marketplace. Like I was selling something. Okay. Put something on there. Immediately got a message, a messenger message on Facebook saying, is this available? I just put it on there. Yeah, it's available. Whatever. And then I want it. I said, okay, great. I'm thinking Marketplace. This is awesome. I'm like, I sold it in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, just to make sure that you're not tricking me,
they played the reverse psychology thing on you.
Yeah.
They said, I'm going to send you a message or something, and I want you to confirm that it's you that I'm actually talking to. And man, I didn't even think twice.
Right.
And what ended up happening, I can't remember all the steps, but what ended up happening is I got an alert I had a Google phone number. I had an alert that all of a sudden someone had logged into my Google phone thing. And I was like, immediately my heart sank to my toes. I was like, what in the world was I thinking? Why did I do this? This is ridiculous. And I was able to stop it. I got, because they were going to, basically they were going to just take over my Google phone number, and Lord knows what they could do with that. But I got the alert from Google. I was able to stop it, say, no, that wasn't me, and got in there. I changed it. But
I have an in-law that fell for a phishing attack. She was responsible for accounts payable and got a phishing email about a bill that was due. She sent them the money and found out later it was not legit. She almost lost her job for that.
We should do an episode that because there's just numerous stories of people, elderly, who have committed suicide because they got breached. Because for one, a lot of money, but the biggest problem I think for us as a community is they felt so ashamed. We shame people for, and even if we don't, at least it's perceived that way because, so yeah, that's a whole other topic, but it is something I'd love to discuss at some point because you should never feel shame.
Yeah.
Because, we'll have moments where we're not situationally aware, right? Where we do things that we later regret. We web it. So let's not regret. Okay. Together.
Do we all know what he went and breaches all?
Thank you. And on that note, so hopefully it was a good episode. I always appreciate you guys' feedback and perspectives, right? Because we work together, so Thanks for giving me what you got.
That was great.
Thanks, Evan. Nice topic.
Hey, Bond.
Hey, Bob, we'll talk later.
All right.
Bye.